Okay, hi. Thanks for coming back and seeing us all in this week in Flat Earth. And I'm Lori, and I'm here with John the Morgile and with
Hello.
Lawrence Wright. Say
Hi,
hello.
hi from
And
the UK.
I'm going to start the show off with a couple of things that are actually been happening in this week in Flat Earth. And last week I reported, well, every week I report the amount of videos that are listed on YouTube under the guise of just the two words flat earth. And it appears either a lot of videos have been purged or they're changing the search parameters or something, because we dropped nearly 200,000 hits in 1 week. So either YouTube is playing games or people have changed and not using flat earth as their search terms or something, but we'll see how it re-evolves next week on that number. The globe trolls were in full attack this week. There's been at least one, if not two, of the closed groups on Facebook that were hijacked by globe trolls and completely taken over and became globe groups. So we admins in some of the larger groups have been exchanging names of who these globe troll hijackers are, and we're making sure that they're getting booted from our groups and or not being admitted, because they all seem to want to join in one big group because there's safety in numbers. So also this week, Scott Kelly showed up with a fake video from the fake International Space Station of a fake UFO, and so we're gonna follow to see if that actually gets any legs, because it seems like every week they come up with some boom bang thing from the ISS, as if that's the only thing in the world that's going on, other than fake news and fake false flags and fake other things. So might as well be fake space and fake UFOs. Also this week, the hashtag Fake Lives Matter hit the alternative media by storm, with the crisis actor girl who is always crying on the phone at every crisis everywhere. And the memesters took quite a holiday with her, and I've seen her in everything from the backseat sitting next to JFK to in one of the rowboats leaving the sinking Titanic to the destruction of the Hindenburg. So it's kind of I guess a theme of, if you can't beat them, then make fun of them. So it's kind of interesting, and there are people who have no idea who this crisis actor woman is, have to have seen her a multiple bunch of times. So maybe now they'll pay attention, or they'll notice the next time they see her and we poke fun at the fact that she's at every single major crisis scene that happens anywhere, either in the world or at least in the US. The next thing is, we'll see what happens with this, but it appears that Kent Hovind has decided to to accept a debate with the Flat Earth community. I don't know that any one person has, I think somebody challenged him to a debate, since he came out a few weeks ago as an anti-flat earther, as a globe head, and was very adamant about it. And so it appears that some people are quite relentless, and they want to debate him and make sure that the flat earth philosophy and theory gets heard. But what's interesting about that is I'm not really sure who really cares, because now that he's come out as such an anti-flat earther and such a heliocentrist, I'm not really sure his credibility makes any difference to anybody. And so we'll see what happens with that. If somebody asked me to debate him, I definitely would say no, because he's pretty slick, and it's not really of any interest of mine to convince Kent Hovind that the Earth is flat when he's so absolutely certain that it's a globe. So with that, that's some of the updates in the news this week, so that as the weeks go by, you can kind of reflect back on some of these things when you rewatch some of these old videos or catch up with them. So here we go. I'm going to start the show or the conversation with Lawrence, who's going to bring us up to date on his venture, which is to find the correct map of the world and to decide whether the the azimuthal equidistant flat Earth map that we've been accustomed to using in the flat Earth is the map of choice. So go with that, Lawrence.
I have a little, if there's anybody watching, well, they might not be watching now, but if they watch the recording, well, they might be watching now. There's a little experiment that you can do. It won't cost you any money, well, very little money. So, and particularly those that are, you know, in the higher latitudes. So, I doubt we've got many in the southern hemisphere, but there's a fair few people from Scandinavia who are flat earthers, and this is the time of the year when we get the very short nights. So, in the UK, sorry, the very short days and long nights. So in the UK, it doesn't get light till about 9 in the morning, and it starts going dark about 4 o'clock. So a little experiment that you can do is find say a football pitch or a soccer pitch, as you would call it, or a field, somewhere where you can actually see both the sunrise and the sunset. Then go out in the field, and you can use that as a point of reference, and then mark a big cross in the field. Get some tape or something, draw a big cross in the field, and then get in that field for the sunrise in the morning with your camera and a compass, and you obviously, we the viewers, if you're doing a YouTube, we'll be able to see where the sun's rising, and then we can mark it off on this, on this big cross thing. And then get back in the evening or later on in the early afternoon, as it will be, for the sunset. And if the sun is only out for a very short period of time, then it should only be covering, less than half a circle. But if it's rising and setting and it's covering, 180 degrees of a circle, then there's a big problem. And nobody seems to have done anything on this yet. I doubt whether it'd be any good where you are, John or Laurie, because you're in the warmer climates and you don't tend to get the variations in winters and summers in terms of the amount of daylight. But up in the north, we do get big variations. So in the UK, we get about 17 hours of daylight in the peak of summer, and it drops down to about 7 in the winter. So that will be a good way of verifying whether the sun is actually circling or not, or whether it's moving in a straight line. So, and it's very easy to do, but when we see all these videos from the Arctic or the Antarctic, they never give you a point of reference so you can see with the starting point and the finish point. You see the flagpoles, but most of those have been doctored, so they've been bits of film spliced together to make it look like the sun had done a full circle. But I don't think it does, so that's a good way of doing it. And get a few YouTubes on that online, then that's going to add some more wood to the fire to thrash this out, because it's not going to go away. And I know somebody who's working on it now, and he's going to put a YouTube about it, and he's got some more evidence. Can't say what it is, and hopefully it'll be out soon, and it might make quite a few waves in flat Earth.
Cool. Well, I guess we'll see. Until we start doing some repetitive experiments, and especially some experiments over time. I mean, you can't just go do one and say, oh, well, there's where the sun moves, because we know it moves north and south during its trek of the year, during the year.
Yeah,
so
I know, but let's say the sun is out, for a quarter of the day. Then if it's out for a quarter of the day, it should have done a quarter of a circle. It should have done 90 degrees. So if in that quarter of a day it's actually done 180 degrees, well, which is the same as a straight line, then that is a big problem for a circling sun, isn't it? Because if it's done half a circle in a quarter of a day, then you know, that's all out of sync, because in another you know, quarter of a day, it's going to complete the circle. So it'll be back, which means the days are only going to be 12 hours long. If you get my drift.
Well, I'm trying to. I'm really trying to. As have so many.
If you draw a circle on a piece of paper, Laurie, yeah.
No, I get that part. I get that part. Yeah. I'm just trying to visualize as large as the Earth is. You know, even you know, we hear that all the time from the globe people who say, well, the Earth is too big for you to possibly see any curvature, you know, so it's kind of, I'm trying to wrap my mind around what I would see, so I need to do that experiment so that I can see for myself. The
official models have got the sun completing a full circle in a day, haven't they? So
I understand.
In half a day, you should do half a circle, quarter of a day,
and it is the model that, I'm sorry, Art, we have a delay because of UK. I'm not trying to talk over him. So it is the model that we're introduced to when we become a flat earther. That's commonly known, that's the model that people have been using, is the circular map, the azimuthal AE or Gleason's map, and the circle, you know, the sun going around a circle and the moon going around a circle, and that's the model that we've been told so far. And it's kind of like everything else. Okay, who decided that and why? And because I'm not just automatically going to go from one liar model to the next liar model and just accept that. So what do you think, Jonathan?
Yeah, a couple things on the. I also do sort of keep tabs on search results, and yeah, if you Google search or YouTube search flat Earth, it definitely dropped over 200,000 in the last week. And one thing that I can point to, maybe anecdotal evidence, maybe not so anecdotal, is I know personally of 2 YouTube channels that were truth channels and basically have been dedicated to flat Earth recently that have been just nixed. And basically what both of these people, it's Wake the Sheeple 2015 and Marmar Queen, who's out of, I think, Pakistan. Wake the Sheeple's he's out of the U.S. But both of them just had their accounts totally nixed by YouTube with no copyright strikes, no warnings, and just basically they gave them sort of lame-ass, lumped-together answers, and they've both been, you know, trying to contact YouTube and trying to appeal it, and they're just really getting canned responses and graveyard shift responses. So that's a little bit scary. So that may have a lot to do with it, is they're sort of letting the axe fall on some YouTube channels for whatever reason. And there may have been other reasons for them. I mean, I don't know exactly what the reasons were, but it's sort of a coincidence that they were both, you know, flat earthers. So just something to keep in mind. And I know Mr. Thrive and Survive has been talking about putting together a video platform where we can, you know, we don't have to worry about that sort of thing. And so for any of the YouTubers watching this show or that see this show get their channels nixed, maybe talk to Rich, Mr. Thrive and Survive, because I think he's planning on launching something where we can, you know, still put our videos online where people can find them and maybe monetize it and that sort of thing if that's what you're interested in. As far as Kent Hovind, yeah, I mean, either in most cases what I found is the people that are very much clinging to the globe Earth haven't really been presented with the flat Earth case correctly. There's a lot of misinformation out there that people cling to, and you know, some of this stuff is either, you know, theoretical or it's not falsifiable, so it's sort of like pseudoscience what people are clinging to. But the basic fact of the matter is there's a ton of clear empirical physical evidence that all of us can, you know, verify, that shows conclusively that the Earth couldn't possibly be a spinning globe. And so with that in mind, if you go with that hypothesis and look at the different models, and agreed, we don't have a clear, concise model that we can all, you know, stake our names to, but, you know, I think that there's some honor in that. And I also think that there's something to be said about a bit of mystery. And perhaps we're not meant to understand everything conclusively, or given the contemporary frame of mind and the contemporary paradigm, we're simply incapable of understanding certain things like the path of the sun because we're thinking inside of globe Earth rules and laws and boundaries. And so, to me, you know, the statement that there must be some logical explanation for the path of the sun may not be true. I mean, you know, I'm the type of person that likes to say there must be a logical answer for everything, and surely there is a logical answer for the path of the sun. But what my point is with our current realm of understanding, you know, we may not have the science or the models to accurately describe what's going on with the sun. But to me, it's an afterthought because, again, we can easily, conclusively, verifiably prove that the Earth is in no way, shape, or form spinning and in no way a globe. So we just sort of got to go with what we can prove and try to stay away from, you know, clinging to pseudoscience, which, again, the definition of pseudoscience is theories that can't be proven or falsified. And so, you know, sometimes it's good to stick to basics.
Well, and it's the classic globe sort of sticky in the ribs few questions or few stabs they take always revolve around things that we can't answer, like where's the edge? Why don't we fall off? You know, what do you mean it's a circle? You circle like a pancake? You know, I mean, all of these kinds of jabs typically are either repeated because someone has done the research into the debunkers and not into the flat earth itself. And if you go to debunk the flat earth, but you go to other debunkers to get your information, then you're not really looking into the flat earth research from the flat earth perspective.
That's exactly what I'm saying. And a good example of this would be everybody's seen the Vsauce video where he supposedly debunks the flat earth. But basically what he does is he takes, and whether he did this intentionally or he just did this out of, so what a lot of people do is they'll Google search flat earth proof or whatever, and they'll get the first 5 results, and the sponsored results is the Flat Earth Society. Not to be confused with the International Flat Earth Research Society, which is the thing that, you know, Eric Dubé's headed off, which actually has a lot of good information. But it's got some issues with that. But the Flat Earth Society, basically what they do is they make some, you know, cases for the flat Earth, but ultimately their whole mission is to discredit it by saying things like gravity is caused by the Earth accelerating upward at 9.8 meters per second, which is preposterous. That is in no way akin to really anybody's model. As far as I know, all true serious flat earthers will tell you that the Earth is indeed stationary. And gravity isn't necessary if we don't live on a globe that's spinning, you know, 1,000 miles per hour at the equator. Granted, it's spinning at the pole half the speed as the hour hand on a clock, okay, in the globe Earth model. But the thing's supposedly spinning over 1,000 miles per hour at the equator, and the fundamental fact of this is gravity is only necessary on a ball. We don't necessarily need gravity on a flat stationary plane model because of the already proven laws of density and buoyancy. And if you look into density and buoyancy laws, there still needs to be some type of downward tendency for more dense objects. And to me, that downward tendency could be related to a number of things other than gravity, because again, gravity only needs to exist in the heliocentric model, and something as simple as you know, similar densities being on a similar harmonic wavelength, or it could be electromagnetic. It could be something that we haven't thought of yet, which is very possible. And so when you look at the videos like Vsauce and he tries to debunk the flat earth using all these red herring arguments that don't even apply to the true correct flat earth model, and that's what happens a lot of times is people get these, they see these very lame arguments and they say, yeah, this is ridiculous, and they think they've debunked it, when in fact all they've done is debunk a red herring argument that's irrelevant. So
exactly. Well, and when you go to just to do a Google search. Let's say, for example, you wander across one of our Facebook pages and you see a post that one of us has made about flat Earth. And it may just be one aspect of flat Earth, because flat Earth theory and flat Earth investigation and research has as many aspects about it as the globe model does, because each facet of the elements in which we live, the sun, the moon, the oceans, the magnetism, you know, all these different aspects have their own research and sub-research. So if someone posts something about flat Earth and then ends it up with, you know, the Earth is flat, or posts a meme that says the Earth is flat, and someone just rolls their eyes and goes, oh my God, I'm going to have to go look into this, because this person that I'm seeing this from, like me, for example, is someone that they trusted from other conspiracies or other alternative media sources or something like that, and then all of a sudden, oh my God, you just turned into a, you know, a Looney Tune, and you're a flat earther now, and how can this be? And so they're instead of asking you the classic questions, they just go and Google flat Earth debunk, usually, and then they're going to get that whole debunking garbage line of stuff that, and then they're just going to accept that because it sounds plausible. So Lawrence, when you first got into flat Earth, which, you know, has been, I think you said, years ago, compared to now, you didn't have, except for old books and old manuscripts and maybe a few old-time videos, you didn't have the research available to you from as many sources as is available now. So what do you think about the onslaught of all of the opinions and research and what could be considered division? And the reason why I ask that is because I'm dealing with the contention now on my Facebook group that I decided that I wanted to question everyone. That was another thing that I did this week, was, you know, how many of you, what is the percentage of you are already convinced that we live on under a dome or under an enclosed world? And so far, unless, you know, those who don't believe it aren't speaking up, which is classic, more people are saying that they're sold on the dome or enclosed world, but usually they say the word dome. So what do you think about all of this incoming information and research?
It's new, isn't it? If you look at the, you know, the late 1800s, when there was a resurgence in flat Earth research, and they were doing the Bedford level experiment and things like that. They certainly weren't talking about domes then. The domes really just come in recently. You know, we know who's the main proponent of the dome, and they never fail to mention it. But there is a upper firmament for sure. Otherwise, they would go into space. Obviously, they can't. So there's something stopping us actually physically going out, whether that's a physical barrier or it's electromagnetism, or some other, you know, kind of denser type of air. There's certainly something there, but it doesn't necessarily need to be dome shaped. It could be a, you know, like a level piece of glass, you know, or the, you know, the shape of a piece of glass, and then there could be some other civilization above that. Maybe that's, you know, when you ascend, maybe that's where you go to a higher dimension, and you know, you're lighter, because that's what they reckon. When you die, at the point of death, your body loses exactly 29 grams, or about an ounce, which they reckon is the weight of the soul. So maybe that's where you go. And if you've been a bad boy or a bad girl, maybe you go down, and you go down to an even denser environment, which is hell.
So you're saying it's kind of like the old record record player with
I
the
think it could
thing
be,
in the
yeah.
middle, and there's maybe a record on top and a record on top of that.
A stack of pancakes, and we're somewhere in the middle. And if you want to go up to the higher levels, you've got to be good and earn your promotion to a higher level of spirituality. Because that's what people, when they say they're going to ascend, they seem to think they're going to heaven or a better place. But maybe these are real physical places that we can go.
Well, what was the time of the dome painting that was made by everybody? The famous guy with the guy peeking out through the dome.
Oh, that was about
what year was that?
Ago, wasn't it? That was over 100 years ago. Yeah.
Well, wasn't that picture supposed to be somehow related to the Gospel of Enoch, or am I confusing the picture?
It may have been, yeah.
I think so, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
It got some significance, but I don't
know when it was painted, but if that's the same story, then that goes back to a long time ago.
I think God's a lot more sophisticated than sticking a big glass bowl over the top of us and saying let's keep him in using that. He's probably got something far more, sophisticated, something that's got to last anyway. If it was a physical dome, and it's there for thousands of years, it's going to need maintenance, isn't it? And
and the air inside here sure would be getting stale right about now, right? Too.
Yeah.
The what, sir?
Well, and one thing about the world is it's very good at finding balance. That's something I've commented on before. Is nature is very much balanced, and so I just don't see there being a whole lot we could do, even if it was an enclosed system. Which personally, I've never seen any evidence that we live in any sort of an enclosed system. Electromagnetic fields, which are definitely generated, here on the ground, and it's what causes, magnets to point north, is a huge electromagnetic field around the Earth, probably beneath us as well. They always take a dome-shaped, toroidal shape, and so I think that there's, probably good evidence for that. But for there to be any sort of physical dome that's connected to the ground somewhere south of Antarctica, I don't see any evidence for it. Sure, there could be. I'm not saying I know for sure there isn't. But to me, it just seems far more likely that the whole reason that the military had drafted the Antarctic Treaty in the 50s and basically has done a very good job of keeping Antarctica out of the realm of curiosity for so long, because what's their motive? Why would they want to hide that from us if it's if it just ends? To me, it just doesn't make any sense why they would put a perimeter to protect us from getting to the perimeter. That's counterintuitive, and I just don't see them wasting their money and effort on that. On the other hand, if we could simply just walk away from this madness, I could see them wanting to hide that very dearly. And one of the first things that they would do is they would make movies like The Truman Show, which is predictive programming, so that if this thing ever leaks out and gets big, then we can basically convince most people that they're still stuck here on planet Earth and there's no escape. And to me, I'll believe that when I see it. And up until this point, honestly, I've been researching this thing pretty seriously for 6 months, and to me, any assertion of a physical dome is either conjecture or misinformation. And it's far more in line with the evidence that the ground that we walk on is the physical plane, and the stars in the sky are in the astral plane. And there could be other worlds very close by here on the ground, and I don't see any problem with that scripturally. A lot of people say, well, that's against the Bible. I don't think so. And there's a case to be made for that. Now, if we do find out that it's an enclosed system, then that's fine. I'm not attached to any model, but I just don't think it's right for anyone to assert that they have these answers, like a dome in the sky, an enclosed world, without the evidence to back it. That's what got us in this whole mess in the first place.
So the whole idea then for to come to any conclusion as far as what surrounds or encloses us, and the two are mutually exclusive in my opinion. What surrounds us could just be ice for thousands, tens of thousands of miles, okay? And then it ends in some way, perhaps. But for anyone to say that, I mean, there's someone hit me this week with, what is it, the not Iron Dome, iron something, darn it.
Talking about like the meteorites?
Well, that someone in the late 1800s found the dome, found the edge, found the wall. They called it the wall. And what they sent me a link, and I haven't had the time to sit down and read it because I've got a bunch of other research that I'm focusing on, and I have to decide, be really stringent about, don't get distracted, because I'm easily distracted, and then I never finish anything. So I'm rereading this week. I'm rereading the Book of Enoch that I read probably 20 years ago with fresh eyes, for the purpose of really paying attention to the clues that are there, that people are using to talk about, not only the flat Earth, but it's very specific, some of the things that are said that didn't make any sense before, but now they kind of make a lot more sense. So yeah, if there's gates where the sun comes in and out, if there's a gate where the sun goes across the plane and disappears and then goes zoop and comes in the other side, kind of like Pac-Man, where the little icon leaves the screen over here and goes across, and then boop, it comes back over on this side. Okay, it could be, because I have no evidence to prove for or against that theory, and it's just as possible as any other theory of the circle, the sun going around a circle. I consider the sun and moon as clocks. One tells you what time it is in the day, and the other one tells you what time it is in the night. But I always believed it was very simple until I started seeing the moon showing up in the day when the sun was up, and I'm like, okay, now wait a minute, that just screws up all that, because they can't be both timepieces going off in the daytime. Now I'm so confused. But I'll give you an example. When I first moved to the city I live in Sarasota, Florida, I've never been so lost so many times trying to find my way around this town, because it doesn't have a grid system that is easily understandable like many other cities. In other words, avenues go one way and streets go another way, and boulevards are, crossing up. There's no understanding. So I went and bought a map trying to figure out, where am I when I get lost? Well, you have to know where you are in order to find yourself on the map to say you are here, right? And so one day I was lost, and I was talking to a friend on the phone, and I was kind of at, that old joke about I'm at the corner of walk and don't walk. I don't know where I am. And they said, well, look for the sun. The bay, Sarasota Bay, is to the west, and that should help you determine where you are on the map. And I'm like, well, that doesn't work because the sun's right over my head. So it's noon. I don't know where I am. So my purpose in telling all of that rigmarole is that that whole idea of Genesis, creation story in the Bible that says, and God made the lesser light and the greater light, and the lesser light was for the the days of the month, and the sun and the stars were designed to help people navigate and know what's happening in the sky, and be able to know things like seasons that are coming and changing and so on. So the Inuits, for example, just put up a video a few years ago that people are posting again about the sun moved, and their whole lifestyle, their whole livelihoods are based on the amount of sun in the day, and that they have, you know, an hour or two less sun in a day. I don't know how to explain that. I can't explain that. I don't know if it's disinformation or if the sun actually shifted its, you know, circle or its line, whichever the case may be. Either one of you guys got any input on that?
I think there may be some windows for the light to come in and out, because if you look at Genesis, day 1, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So it was light, but the sun didn't come along. He didn't create the sun till day 4. So where did that original light come from? It doesn't make sense, does it? How can you have light without the sun if the sun is the only source of light?
The smallest, what is it? The smallest particle of light is actually sound. If you break down light to its smallest particle, it's sound.
It's all a vibration, whatever. Everything's just vibrating.
I've never heard that, but it may be the case. But I'm becoming more and more convinced that most theoretical physics is very much in the realm of theoretical, and a lot of the models that we have are really up for debate. You know, one thing a lot of people have observed is that the way that they've, you know, got the solar system in the conventional model is very, very similar to an atom, where you've got, you know, the nucleus in the center and electrons, which are just opposite charges. You know, the electrons are negative charges, the neutron's a positive charge, and very many similarities to the atom and the solar system. And when you really start digging into, you know, how have we confirmed the, you know, this whole heliocentric type of atom, it's still very much theoretical, and they're still, you know, trying to get closer and closer images. And then, of course, you've got places like CERN, which are trying to collide, you know, particles and create the same situation that was seconds after the Big Bang, which is ridiculous. So, you know, to me, conventional science is very important, but just like we have to do in the flat Earth, I think it's important for mainstream science also not to take their theories and assumptions too far without the zetetic process, which is basically to proceed only by inquiry and only take steps that we can prove. If we see problems with, you know, what we're observing, then we need to prepare for them and make further observations. So, you know, to jump to conclusions about the sun going through a gate and coming out the other side, I mean, sure, that could be possible, but to me it seems more likely that it is going in a circuit. But what we see in terms of the sun's light is not necessarily where the sun is or even what the sun is. And, you know, if you really observe the way that day happens, the sun is basically like a laser beam as far as you're concerned, standing directly beneath it. That's the highest point at noon. But when the sunlight hits our atmosphere, the atmosphere essentially reacts and lights up like a sapphire in all directions. And so when the sun sets, the atmosphere isn't reflective at all, and we can see the stars, and we're told that those stars are trillions of miles and millions of light years away. But in fact, if you really break it down and look and study this and look at the way the Earth is supposed to travel around the sun, it's very clear that the conventional model is wrong, and even the North Pole star Polaris is much, much closer than we've been told. So when the whole heliocentric model breaks down, and you also look at other theoretical physics on the, you know, the microscopic level, it just gets to the point to where we really can't go by all these assumptions and expect that we as biased observers have the ability to understand every bit of this empirically, as long as we continue with the same trains of thought that we've been doing for the last 100 years, which has gotten us in a huge mess.
I've got a question for you then, John, because I mean, I'm dubious about all these protons and neutrons and electrons, because we've never ever seen one. I mean, they supposedly split the atom in 1930 or something like that, but if you can't see something, how on earth can you split it? And how can you measure it? And how can you see what it's split into? We're just taking a lot of face value that they've actually done this stuff.
Well, that's right. And the original hydrogen bomb was very crude. It was a very manual thing. People, they say it took thousands of scientists, however many years to develop it, but according to the mainstream narrative, they honestly supposedly didn't know whether the thing was going to destroy the whole Earth with the first one they lit off. And when you really get down into the meat of it, they had synchronized explosions firing in towards some type of enriched uranium, and they had to get it just right at the perfect atomic second in order for it to work. And when you look at evidence like the fact that if it was a 1 megaton bomb, then that is the equivalent as I think it's 1,000 tons of dynamite, something like that. 1 megaton is 1,000 tons, I believe, of dynamite. And so to get a very similar effect, all you'd have to do is put 1,000 tons of dynamite in the same place and light it off, and it would basically do a mushroom cloud and have some residual radiation, and it would look awesome. And to me, it seems more and more likely that the whole nuclear weapons thing is looking more and more like a hoax, especially when you get into the fact that you're right. I mean, all of this atomic stuff with valence electrons and how atomic things merge together in reactions, it works in theory, but it's still just theoretical. And I just have a problem with something calling itself a proven fact of science when in fact it's just a theory that works with the observations. And I would remind everyone that theories are designed to work with the observations. So you can't use the observations that spurred the theory to prove the theory. The theory needs to be proven beyond the observations, which a lot of cases you just simply can't do, no matter how hard they search for it. Gravity is a good example. They're still looking for gravity waves, even this many years into our technology. Can't find a gravity wave, and yet we still consider it as a fact because everyone thinks we live on a spinning globe, so there must be gravity, right? And that's how it works with these assumptions.
Well, it's the same thing with the assumption of, the boat disappearing over the horizon, bottom first. It's the same kind of assumption. Sure does look like that, If that's all you're going on, yep, sure does look like that. But that's not what's happening. So, I'm the same way about kind of the whole prove it thing. No, I'm not a microbiologist or a physicist or any other of the other divisions inside science. But when I made that red boat video, people said, well, look at exactly, the ship is disappearing from the bottom up. You can't see the bottom of the red boat anymore. And I'm like, but what about all that mirroring that's happening on the top of the surface? That's why you can't see it. No, that has nothing to do with it. That's where it's disappearing over the horizon. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. What about that buoy that's sitting right next to it that is floating in the air? I mean, it's literally floating. You can see the bottom of it floating in the air. So how does that relate to your theory of it if the boat's going over the horizon? But yet it's like, well, but that's different, and that's the kind of stuff that is so hard to have an argument about.
Anyone that has trouble understanding, the whole Columbus with the ships going over the horizon thing, I would just urge them to read Zetetic Astronomy, because Dr. Robotham did, pretty damn good observations about how perspective works. And a simple way to put it is, if you're looking at a parallel line, a vertical line moving parallel to your line of sight, say it's a telephone pole or the mast of a ship, whatever, the further away it gets, the higher up towards the horizon the bottom will get, and the lower down towards the horizon the top will get. That's just how perspective works. Now, the problem is most people understand perspective as every line vanishing to the same point and converging at the same point, which is sort of accurate, but it's not. If you actually observe parallel lines moving away from you, the farther up away they are from your line of sight, the more distant their vanishing point would be. And so the top of the mast of the ship vanishing after the hull is in accordance with the natural laws of perspective. And the problem is people see that ship go over the horizon and merge with the horizon and disappear, But if you zoom back into it with a high-powered telescope, the whole thing reemerges, which is impossible because you understand that it should be below the horizon line on the curve of the Earth. That's your whole argument as a flat Earth, as a global
Right. You
Earther.
just blew your own argument.
Right.
Exactly.
Yep. It would be impossible. You wouldn't be able to. A telescope can't see around a corner, and it can't see through 500 feet of ocean. The fact that you can zoom back in on that ship that's merged with the horizon and see it again, to me, doesn't prove the flat Earth. It just proves that the Columbus argument is irrelevant. And to me, simply breaking apart the globe Earth arguments is good enough because the Earth is demonstrably a stationary plane. We can see lighthouses from 60 miles away. People that set up radio towers have commented that they've made impossible radio shots over 60 miles, over 70 miles, over 110 miles, where even at the elevation that they were at, shouldn't have had a clear line of sight from tower to tower because of the supposed curve of the Earth. There's plenty of evidence that points to the Earth being flat and stationary, and so we can't, go pointing to things like, well, what about the sun? Because honestly, we really don't understand the sun. I mean, if you say that it's 93 million miles away and it's a huge ball of hydrogen and something else, hydrogen and nitrogen or something, but they're not burning. They're, atomic fusion, which is it's just all theory. I mean, it's all theory, but it's asserted to us as factual, and so we think that it's factual, but it's not. I mean, if you break it down and really look at the way that we supposedly measured the distance to the sun, it doesn't work. And we can take the same measurements and say that it's 4,000 miles away without figuring in spherical trigonometry, because, again, we don't live on a sphere. So why would you use spherical trigonometry if we don't live on a sphere? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, there you go. That's classic comparing something that you can see on the Earth to something that's so far away in the sky. People say, well, if the Earth is a disk, then does that mean the sun and the moon are a disk? Well, I never said the Earth is a disk. You did. Yeah, I don't agree the Earth is a disk. I agree the Earth is flat. I don't know whether it's a square plate or a round plate or an oblong plate. I don't know what shape the outside perimeter of it is because I haven't seen it. I haven't visited it, and neither have you. So we can't even be having this argument. I mean, it's just that simple.
Honestly, I could see, and this may sound a little bit abstract, but something that I'm sort of theorizing on, and I don't call it a model and I don't call it a fact, I just call it a theory. To me, the sun just going around in the same exact circle all year round and not changing its course at all, but the flux of our electromagnetic field lines and basically this dome shape of the electromagnetic field fluctuating could cause the optical illusion of the sun traveling back and forth through Capricorn, Capricorn to Cancer throughout the year to cause the seasons. I mean, to me, that would make more sense, explaining it in such a way that we really don't understand this whole system conclusively. But to me, that would make more sense than some, hypothesizing that the thing would go from right to left in a line and then start back over here. I mean, anything's possible, but I just don't think we have all of the necessary observations to make a conclusive model, and it's important that we don't fill in the gaps with wild guesses and conjecture. That's all I'm saying.
Well, and in conclusion to that whole direction of conversation, in my mind, until we coordinate and work together to say, here's what I see, here's where I'm standing, here's where I'm facing, here, here's what time it is, here's what day it is, this is what I see of the moon or the sun or whatever, and be able to coordinate that exact same information, not at your time on where you live on the other side of the plane, but right now, the same time. What do you see? And does what you see either reflect back in mirror form what I see? Because I use the analogy when people say, well, how can I see this face of the moon, but you see the 180-degree flip turn of it? I see the belly button down here and you see the belly button up here, okay? I call it the Billy. I know it's Tycho, some kind of thing, whatever. So, so it's very easy to understand in my mind because I did the experiment myself. I took a round piece of paper and I drew a smiley face, 2 eyes and a little smiley face, and I taped it to the ceiling. And I went to the one far wall and I looked at it, and it was a smiley face. And I went to the other wall and I turned around and I looked back at it, and it was upside down, meaning the smiley face was facing the other way. Okay, so that's not hard to understand if you'll actually see it for yourself or try to make it.
Another thing too, I've seen some pretty good evidence. I haven't observed this for myself, but I've seen a couple of videos that track the path of the moon in the sky during a night, and essentially what it does is it turns like a wheel. The moon turns like a wheel, but it always shows you the same face. And the fact that it does this, if this is indeed a fact, and I think this is something that any amateur astronomer could very easily verify, just take a picture of the moon every 10 minutes for the entire evening and then run it as a animation. But to me, how can the moon, okay, and again, we're looking at the heliocentric general model. If this observation is correct, where the moon's turning like a wheel through the sky, the conventional model says that as the moon orbits us, it spins at the exact same rate so that you always see one face of it. So it's spinning as it's rotating, and that's why we only ever see one face of the moon. But how could it be spinning and tumbling end over end at the same time? It doesn't make much sense. And so if we can get some further verification that the moon indeed turns like a wheel as it goes through its path in the sky in a single evening, that's a very good explanation of why somebody on the opposite hemisphere would see it differently. But on the other hand, it's just like you said, they're facing in opposite directions looking at the same thing overhead. So the guy here looking up is going to see the bottom to top, and the guy here is looking up is going to see the top to bottom. I mean, it's just pretty basic logic, but people have been programmed to assume that these sort of observations are proof of a sphere, when in fact the observations are in no way exclusive to standing on a sphere, which is preposterous.
Well, and how can you see the moon on 5 different continents at the same time during the day? And that has happened. It happened 21 times in July that people in the USA saw the moon in the sky during the day with the sun. And so what, the people over on the other side of the earth didn't have any moon that night? I mean, they saw it too, but at night. See, that's what's trippy about this stuff. You know, your springs start flying out of your head like in the cartoons when you're trying to really wrap your mind around it. So it's not easy, but it isn't supposed to be easy, and it isn't any easier than the stories they give you from space with the spinning and the vortexing and the flying and the, all that stuff. That's pretty convoluted as well. So it's not for everybody to be able to easily wrap their mind around. But at the same time, day after day, flat earthers are doing better and better jobs at modeling some of these ideas. So, Lawrence, what else?
Well, I was
what
thinking.
What else are you working on? Are you just really hunkered down into this direction? What's happening with the sun, or what else you working on?
No, sometimes you just sit and think and try and work things out. So if you go back to Mercator, the map that they've used since the 1500s, and it's the one that's on the wall in the school, the flat map. If you're a map maker, then they obviously have techniques going back then. Presumably they're just observational techniques, drawing little sketches. The coast goes in here, comes out there, and you go so many miles this way, and then it curves around here. So the map makers must have made the maps. I don't think they then decided, let's go and get these maps adjusted to take account of the curvature of the Earth. I think the maps that they make were the maps that they could see and are a true depiction of how things are. So I'm thinking the Mercator map's probably the most accurate map we've got. So it's hidden in plain sight.
Well, one thing I'll say about the Mercator map is I don't think that that map was done by any sort of, well, at least for the unknown parts like the Americas. I don't think that was done by any sort of surveying. It was all sort of done by taking some observations and using essentially the same techniques that people use for navigating, you know, the stars and a sextant and a compass in order to, you know, just to make the projection. Now, one thing that's interesting to me about the Mercator projection is that they did it as it's a cylindrical map, which is, if you can just think of taking a cylinder, well, I guess if you had a map and you rolled it around a cylinder, the way that it's described is the North Pole, the north of the map, and the south of the map are stretched out to infinity. So to me, that means that the whole bottom line and the whole top line of that map is supposedly all the same point. Okay, but the further away you get from the equator, the more and more distorted the relative sizes and distances become. And one thing's for certain on the Mercator projection is you can only, if you go from east to west, you're going to start back off on the other side of the map. If you go west to east, you're going to swing through to the other side of the map. However, if you go north, you're not going to end up on the bottom because of the way that the map was made. And to me, that really says a lot about how they did the projection. And I'm even sort of thinking that perhaps Mercator was a flat earther. And if that's the case, then it may be more accurate than we're giving it credit for. On the other hand, it could be way off. And we can't rely on footage from NASA to confirm the Mercator projection because NASA appears to have been lying about lots and lots of what they've been asserting.
So why can't they give us a proper map now then, you know, a proper official map, you know, because Mercator's was done in whatever, 1569 or something, and we know they haven't got satellites, but they can take images from aircraft. Why don't they produce a bang up-to-date accurate map of how it is? What's to stop them? Why aren't we saying, why are we still using this 1569 map? Why have you not get, you know, you've got satellites up there to get all this very accurate data imaging. Why can't we have a more accurate map? Mind you, that would be a map of a globe, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, that's exactly what we got. And to me,
Lewis and Clark. I mean, Lewis and Clark, their whole expedition was to, you know, follow it started out going down the St. Lawrence River and headed all the way across to the other coast. And, you know, what did they have to make a map out of? You know, a bunch of coonskin something and a piece of charcoal, and you know, they had to make landmarks, and they had to.
Well, they were still explorers, were still surveying and sort of trying to get a feel for California for 200 years after they landed there. And Mercator came out with the projection. It was like 10 or 15 years after the first Spanish set foot in California. And so to even think, especially given the type of map that it is, where we know for a fact that the further away you get from the equator, the more distorted relative distances become to infinity at the poles, then it's ridiculous that NASA would show us pictures of the continents looking exactly like the Mercator projection, because they've already admitted that that's all wrong. So
yeah, but you can go to the gas station and buy a map of Indiana, right? And it has every little road and every little town and every little distance, you know, how much farther we have to go, all about that far. And you know, it's within points of miles, and they're accurate, supposedly. But I mean, you're driving and you're using it as a real-time map. And I'm not talking about GPS. I'm talking about a real piece of paper you have unfold that first time and then can never fold back the same again after that. But you know what I'm saying? I mean, on a small scale, maps are correct. But then how come that can't be extrapolated into a worldwide continental map of each continent?
You know, I've got a good way that somebody could test this. Not it, because I don't have any transportation right now, but anybody with a manual magnetic compass and an automobile and a huge flat area to drive around in. We're talking miles. I don't know where you might go, maybe like a fairgrounds or something, but a lot of area. And just basically drive due west. use the compass as a navigation. Maybe have someone riding shotgun so you can pay attention to the road or wherever you are. And if you go due west for, say, 10 miles, 20 miles, just by that compass, according to the flat earth theory, you should have to constantly be adjusting yourself to the right. I guess you'd have to have pretty damn good alignment too. But I think it would be pretty clear if you had to make always to the right adjustments over miles and miles to maintain your westwardly course. Now, if that turns out to be true, then that would confirm a lot of the, the flat earth argument. And to me, if due west is a perfect curve, then the relative distances would work on a map in terms of looking at a piece of paper and driving, but what you actually have may be something a little bit different, because again, we're assuming that west is a straight line when in fact west is a continuous parabolic curve. It would be a very minor curve, of course, but I think that's something that you could probably conclusively prove if you had the ability to drive due west without any roads to hinder your travel for 30 or 40 miles. It would be pretty apparent.
Well, I mean, there are places like that, the salt flats, and then there's some other flats in Bolivia and some flats in Africa. So, I mean, there are places where you can drive for miles and miles if you had to keep pointing in exactly west.
Yeah.
But the whole idea of this mapping thing is, it's one thing to say how big the continents are, and from the county to the state to the countries, expanding map-wise. But then the problem that happens with the flat Earth map doesn't necessarily happen on the parts of land. It happens in the water. These giant expanses of water between where the continents are not situated in the same places on the flat Earth map as they are on the Mercator map. Correct? They're just not.
That's right. And the reason that they give is because, it's very difficult to, transpose a globe to a 2D rendering. But then if you look at a globe, which is a 3D rendering of the globe, it still has the same relative sizes and distances as the map. So, there shouldn't be a problem with transferring information from one globe to another. And that's why the whole thing is sort of caught with its pants down, because the globe looks exactly like the map. So there's no argument against the, transferring a 3D image to a 2D surface.
Well, with the Mercator map, all you have is Antarctica pretty much all the way across the bottom, right?
Yep.
It's just doesn't, it's not going to be around the perimeter. It's just across the bottom.
Yeah,
right.
If you go on Google Earth, you can go and obviously look at what sort of car you got parked outside your house 2 years ago when they did the, because it's not all real time Google Earth. It's just a series of photographs, isn't it? So if you go on Google Earth, you can go right down to your own house where you live, and then you can come back out, and at a certain point it goes from real to a similar computer simulation, as though it's away from a sphere. But if all these ground images, we know they're accurate because you can see your own house. If all those could be put together in one big map, then you would have a map of the world.
Yeah, but they're only taken from so many feet, so many only so many thousands of feet up, not from a satellite. So
yeah, but they've got all the land masses. You can go on.
Well,
Google Earth.
okay, it's like on the ISS station film they show all the time where they're flying over the Earth at night, and the lights are all lit up, and you can see the little shoe, the toe of the boot of Italy when they go over, or the little horn of Florida sticking down there, but it's a computer simulation.
Well, and I think some of what they're using is real high-altitude footage, and that's why it looks so real. Some of it's obviously computer-generated. Some of it's obviously, fisheye lens or just cropping off the curve with blackness to make it look like a curve. But I really do think that some of the shots from the ISS, and I've watched it quite a bit, doing the show every Tuesday, but some of it looks like it's real high-altitude footage. And that's sort of the best way for them to do it, because if you mix in true realistic stuff that's actually taken from high altitudes and assert that it's from space, you can't tell. You really, honestly, you can't tell the difference from the little lens angle that they give you. And,
right. That's the point. They only give you this little bit right here, and we're moving, and so we can't connect what we just saw with where we are now, because it's like looking through the bottom of a glass bottom boat or something. You're only seeing so much of underneath the boat. You're not seeing the expanse of what's really under you. Could be creatures lurking 3 feet over there, and you wouldn't see them looking out the bottom of the flat bottom boat. So the whole trying to suppose what the Earth looks like from above, I mean, isn't that one of the things that got mankind to want to fly or to want to soar where the eagles are or the birds are or whatever? We want to look down and want to see where we live,
Well, that's absolutely right. And, with modern technology, lots of people are sending up weather balloons 10, 20, 30, 40 miles into the air. And what we see continuously every single time is that the horizon raises with the eye level or raises with the observer even to those altitudes, which totally demolishes the globe model, because when you're at that sort of altitude, your angle of attack should hit the horizon at lower and lower and lower points as you gain altitude. And to the point where you're 40 miles, you should have to look at considerably a downward angle to see the horizon. But in fact, it raises with the observer, which is just another, proof of the world being a plane. There's tons of it. I mean, it's everywhere. It's been in front of us our whole lives, but they literally shut that part of our brain down as early as possible to basically tell us, you don't know what you're talking about. You're a stupid little kid. The Earth is not stationary, and it is a globe, and kids will eventually, and most children have a problem with it, but another thing that they're doing is they're putting it into the movies, Star Wars, all the space movies, to where children are way more apt to accept this whole infinite space thing than they were 30 years ago, just because of all the sci-fi stuff. So there is a lot of predictive programming, but if you can actually look at this thing as a rational adult and sort of let your assumptions go for a minute, to me it's really all pretty obvious. And that's what's so frustrating about it, is because people will cling to, extra or, outside of the box proofs of the sphere Earth, which are never, exclusive to a sphere Earth. Like, if I take my pen and drop it, it falls to the ground, and therefore it's a spinning globe that we live on. But that doesn't make any sense. Things falling to the ground work in the flat Earth model as well. So a lot of the arguments are just ridiculous.
Well, they've also done a fabulous job to you as a child to label you as an idiot if you believe what your senses tell you, that the Earth is still and flat, by relating to you that these stupid goat herders from thousands of years ago believed the Earth was flat, and we're so much more sophisticated today, aren't we, that we wouldn't want to be thought of as being a stupid goat herder nowadays. And so anybody who has any brains at all understands completely that the Earth is a spinning globe and should not question that part. That's been decided. So if you question, then you automatically have to go through all of the other chatterboxes who are repeating and parroting, oh, you're a stupid goat herder, from 2,000 years ago, who thinks the Earth is flat, because they heard it too. And everybody wants to be thought of as being smart, so the only way to be as smart as everybody else is to believe the same thing. And therefore, I'm okay because I'm this smart. So, if you question, then you have to do so in silence to begin with, and most flat earthers do that. Most people who become a flat earther start out questioning in the quiet of their computer in their home office or whatever, and and nobody's watching them watching these videos and watching their aha moments where they go, damn, that makes so much sense now. And then as a little time goes by and their excitement builds about this new information that they're getting, then it's natural to find others who agree and believe what you believe, and question what you question. And so that's where most people find themselves at that point. That's when they start looking to other people to communicate these things with and learn more and learn what other people's viewpoints are. Then you hit this wall of, well, now I've got this idea that the Earth is an enclosed dome because that made sense to me from this guy. And then I heard from this other guy that it's an infinite plane and there might be some more land and some more ponds out there. And so now I'm confused again, and now I got a problem because then I need to choose.
Well, I don't think you have to choose. Go ahead, Lawrence. Sorry, bud.
I was just going to say it's getting quite ironic in Flat Earth world now. I did some searches on YouTube for, typed in things like 9/11, JFK, 7/7, all that sort of stuff, the moon hoax, and I did 10, and Flat Earth came in third. So considering it's only been going, about a year, it's probably by far the most looked at conspiracy at the moment, and it's just growing, really, really quickly. But the funny thing is, a lot of these people who are moaning about it now, it's because they've got nobody to talk to. So all the people Laurie used to talk to about chemtrails on those sites, you don't go there anymore. So these people say, where's everybody gone? They've gone to this Flat Earth. What's going on? I'm going to go and sort these Flat Earthers out. I've got nobody to talk to. Bring them back over here. That's what's going on, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, actually,
how dare you have all the attention?
Honestly, I swear, my inbox gets banged all the time with people going, where the hell are you? I know you're into that flat earth thing, but you never come back to I'm in a lot of other groups and pages and stuff, and I just rarely visit there anymore unless I'm bombing them with some flat earth stuff, and they're like, what happened to you? Is that like the end all be all to everything conspiracy? Is the flat earth now, or what the hell?
It is. To me, it supersedes everything, just because it shows that fundamentally everything that we've taken as a fact, in terms of theoretical physics at least, is probably completely wrong. And most of the people in the world believe that they have a really good understanding of the universe and the world and, theology, when in fact, most of what they believe is totally wrong. And so it's difficult for people to look within themselves and understand that they've been fooled, for one. It's very hard to convince somebody that they've been fooled about, say, Santa Claus. That's a good example. Kids don't want to believe that because they like the idea of Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny or the Tooth Fairy, and they're comfortable with it. But when people have invested their entire lives into this theoretical model, and especially the scientific community, it just becomes so hard for them to even consider this. And so you really do, when you become a flat earther, you alienate yourself from just about everybody. And to me, that's why it's so important to get this out there and get the proofs out there, because it is very obvious and in your face. And I just hate to see people misled. To me, that's awful. And I just want people to understand the truth, and I really just don't give a damn if they think I'm stupid, because I know that I'm not, and I know what the truth is.
Well, and you can't all of a sudden become stupid. You get me? I was as educated as all of those other people. I knew in my head all the things they knew. The Earth is a spinning ball, and it's flying through space, and here's the circumference. And as a matter of fact, I know more about the ball now than I did before when I lived on one, okay? And so, because for years, I never questioned any of these numbers or facts or anything. It's just that it is what it is. And if you know it, then you are considered educated. Because if you don't know it, then you're some goat herder who lives on the side of the mountain in ancient Italy. And so to become a flat earther doesn't mean that you somehow became uneducated. As a matter of fact, it's the opposite. You're probably more educated about the way your world works now as a flat earther than you were before, because you really just didn't give a crap. I mean, you just what's it got to do with anything? I got to go do my job and make my paycheck and pay my rent. So, but the whole part about becoming a flat earther and admitting it, okay, and starting to put that information out to other people puts a target on your back, because people are natural. I don't know when this happened, because I thought like bullies kind of went away when you got out of grade school, okay, or that the worst, high school. But people become bullies all of a sudden, and they start bullying you. How can you believe that? Oh my God, the education system in this country has gone completely to crap, and so on and so forth. And it's like, wait a minute. A year ago, you knew me and you valued my opinion about 9/11 or JFK or any of these other, things going on in the world, and my knowledge of the way the world works. And you thought I was pretty smart, and you told me so. And actually, I probably still got your message in my inbox, because I probably saved it, because like, yeah, that's right, I'm smart. And now I'm an idiot. Really? How does that happen?
That's the programming, and I've made a few videos on it, because that's really all the globe Earth has going for it is the programming. People will automatically block you out and label you as a crazy idiot if you take this position. But if you really take a step back and think about it, the scientific method is intended to either prove or falsify any theory. And so for people who claim to be scientific, to dismiss this offhand and say that you're stupid for asserting it is the opposite of science. Okay, and people think, oh, what about the two big ones are, if you can get NASA out of the way and prove that they're lying, at least about the moon missions, and get someone to concede, okay, NASA's full of crap, I'll give you that. It's just, there's some basic stuff, the gravity and the Coriolis effect, that they always point to as proof of the globe. Well, I mean, we sort of covered gravity. The Coriolis effect is one, and if you guys haven't seen it, I just put out a video yesterday just simply called Earth Not a Globe that covers some basic points that's, I think it's very good for somebody that's on the fence on this, because the Coriolis effect actually proves the flat Earth, and here's why. The idea of the Coriolis effect is, if you're at the equator on the spinning globe, if you were to throw a paper airplane 100 miles to the north, if you could do such a thing, if you threw it north from the equator, it would apparently veer off to the right, because it would be at a faster frame of reference than the latitude 100 miles north of it. Okay? If you were to throw it south, it would veer off to the left, and that's the Coriolis effect, which basically the crux of the Coriolis effect is, if you're on a merry-go-round and it's spinning, and you throw a ball opposite to you to somebody that's going to catch the ball that's directly across from you on the merry-go-round, the ball will apparently head to the right if the merry-go-round's spinning counterclockwise. And that's basically the Coriolis effect. What it means is that if you are on a spinning object and throw a ball, the ball isn't going to keep spinning counterclockwise. It's going to go straight. And so another similar example of this would be is if you take a string with a weight on the end and spin it and let go of the string, the weight's not going to keep spinning. It's going to go straight. So that's the Coriolis effect. What it means is, it's, I think, the second law of motion, that any object in motion will tend to maintain its velocity until enacted upon by some other force. So that's the Coriolis effect. If you throw something from the moving, spinning Earth, it's not going to keep its spinning trajectory. So if you take that into account, and you realize that often a flight from New York to LA is identical in duration to the return flight from LA to New York, globe earthers will say that the westbound flight maintains its eastward spinning trajectory even after the plane takes off and begins to propel itself west, which, if you think about the Coriolis effect and their entire argument that supposedly proves the globe, the plane would not continue with its eastward velocity after taking off and hauling ass west, period. So the Coriolis effect proves that the Earth is stationary. It's not spinning at any rate whatsoever. If that makes sense.
Nice one. No, that was very good. I got that.
Yep.
And I usually don't follow just talking. I need visuals, but that you did good. So I followed that, and hopefully somebody else did too. But so I hope someone will, anyone who wants further information on that, go and watch that video on the Morgile channel, and maybe that will help even more. But I always was told that the Coriolis effect was toilets spin one way in the southern hemisphere and the other way in the northern hemisphere, and people who shoot long-range bullets have to take some kind of argument into some kind of
which they don't. That's a lie. Yeah, snipers don't have to take it into account, and furthermore, neither do artillerymen. And an artillery round is going to go way further than any sniper round. And yeah, they don't have to figure in any sort of spin of the Earth whatsoever. They can fire it west, they can fire it east, and no matter what, artillery is calculated by just simply, the angle of the damn thing. They don't have to figure in the spin of the Earth. And well, if I'm firing this thing north, then it's going to start, losing its eastward.
Well, they tell, but people who do that for a living tell you there's some number that they plug in. There's some formula. It's like, did you make the formula? Do you even know what the formula is? Do you even know what it's for? Do you even know if it has anything to do with the Coriolis effect, or is it just some number that somebody told you to plug in?
Even snipers.
Makes me mad. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I know. It's ridiculous because, again, the basic, there's very basic stuff. If we lived on a spinning globe, it would be abundantly clear. There'd be all sorts of proofs of it. And simply put, the so-called proofs of the globe Earth are indeed proof of the flat Earth, like the Coriolis effect, dropping my pen to the ground, that's supposed to prove gravity, but all that proves is what goes up, what must come down. That's the observation. Gravity was.
They also tell you, well, if you're on a speeding train and you drop something to the ground, does it end up right down here, or does it end up back there somewhere? And I'm like, really? Are we really going to go through this question? This is stupid. It's going to fall right down there. It's on the same train you are, Gomer.
If you throw it high up into the air on that same train, it will maintain its forward frame of reference until the point where it hits the peak of its arc, and then when it's on its way back down, it'll apparently start to head towards the rear of the train. The pen itself wouldn't be heading towards the rear of the train. It would be slipping out of that forward frame of reference as it's on its way down, but not on its way up, if that makes sense.
Okay, yes, that makes sense.
Anyone can do this experiment if you've got a pickup truck. Just go 5 miles an hour in a pickup truck, stand in the back of it, toss a ball high up into the air, and it'll look like it's going straight up, but then on its way back down, it's going to head back it's going to head towards the rear, and that's because it's just going to find its stationary balance. It's not going to keep going forward with the truck for its entire trajectory. And anyone can do that. It's very...
Yeah, that's really not rocket science.
Nope.
It's really not. If you're in the back of a pickup truck moving and you jump up in the air, you're going to land back in the pickup truck. If you drop something in the pickup truck...
If you jump 20 feet, you wouldn't.
Well, no, if you jump 20 feet, but a normal person can't jump that high.
If you just toss something, you can toss something back and forth in a car because any object is gonna maintain that forward velocity until the opposite force of, you can call it gravity, but it coming down is opposite of that forward and upward trajectory. And it's a simple experiment anyone can do that proves that the Earth is stationary, but most people just, they don't want to think it through that far. They just want to think the Earth is spinning and we don't see this happen, so you're stupid. But if you actually experiment with it, you'll realize that the Earth is not spinning. It couldn't possibly be spinning, and whoever thinks this has been thoroughly brainwashed. And if you dismiss it, then you're the opposite of a scientist. You're actually a religious zealot, and your religion would be scientism, which is
Exactly.
basically heliocentrism or worshiping the sun, ultimately.
Exactly. Which is what freaked me out when I heard Kent Hovind say that in the video today, that he believes in the heliocentric model and he believes in the Bible and he's a preacher. So go figure.
He wants to.
I think he wants to revamp his lost career, and
He wants to
he's
say,
making videos one after the next, and he's all over the YouTube. And today he endorsed Hillary Clinton for president, and it was supposed to be a spoof, but it was really bad. It was really lame. And so, apparently he's trying to revamp his career now that he's free, on the backs of whoever he can use.
Maybe he's just doing as he's told. I'm pretty sure he's not that stupid.
Well, a lot of people say that, something happened to him when he was in prison, that it's not the same guy. So I don't know. But at the end of the day, who cares? It's not like, the flat earth reality lives or dies based on whether he believes it or not. I mean, there's a whole lot of other people out there that need some convincing as well. And it just says that he's more brainwashed than than other people, or he's been told,
I think more than likely, he really believes that we live on a spinning globe. That's what he was taught his whole life. It makes sense to him, and the only way that there's only a couple of ways that somebody can remain a globe earther after being presented with this. The first way is the most common, and that's just to dismiss it, ignore it, and go on about your business and never think about it again. We all did that once. The second way you can do it is you can sort of half-heartedly research it, find like the Flat Earth Society, debunk it with some ridiculous things like if the Earth was flat and spinning, or if the moon was a disk, and just all these red herring arguments. That's the other way they can do it. And then the third and final way is to actually study, the different models that people are saying, study the evidence, which there's tons of it, there's tons of proof, and really try to debunk the actual evidence. And in doing so, you sort of have to become a flat earther because it is the truth. And so it's not that many people out of 100 that are actually going to take it that far. Most people are just, the first one. They're just
they're going to divorce it right out of hand and not think
right.
not go any further. Right.
And so to me, I think Kent Hovind is probably number 2. No pun intended.
Well, he came out right out of the box saying that flat Earth was ridiculous and that he can't believe anybody believes it, and the goat herders in southern Italy believed that thousands of years ago. Of course, Ken Hovind thinks the Earth is 6,000 years old, and whether it is or whether it isn't, he's banking his whole program on that. But he's got a long way to go to come back from where he is. And if he did all of a sudden become a flat earther, his credibility, at least I didn't go on record before I went and investigated and said, no way, this is stupid, it's crazy, y'all a bunch of retards, and then come back and go, whoa, I back up, forgive me for my, jumping to conclusions too quick, or for my programming that I was stuck with. Now I, admit, blah, blah. But I'm a nobody, so it doesn't matter what I thought.
What I would say in his defense, too, is being a, creationist Christian, the guy's been on the defensive for a long time, and so he's sort of used to being on the defensive, and it seems like that's his default position, which it's ridiculous, of course, but you can't necessarily blame people for how they react because, again, he's been in sort of a defensive position for all these years as a creationist Christian. And so, I just hope that he does finally give this thing a fair shake and comes on board. But you're right. I mean, he's one person, and if he's endorsing Hillary Clinton even in jest, then I wouldn't do anything of the sort.
I mean, it was really bad. I invite anybody to watch it. He thought he was like on an episode of Saturday Night Live doing a spoof or something. It was really bad. But the whole fact of the matter is I don't expect everyone to look at it first and just say, You're entitled to your opinion. That's just fine. No problem. You can believe whatever you want to believe. I don't expect people to do that because I've seen too many people get vehemently upset and say, what are you, some kind of a crazy nut? You know, you're going to ruin this country with your stupid, ignorant thoughts of flat earth, you know. Okay, so is it important what celebrity people think about the whole thing? No, they're not any different than anybody else. They're not any different than you and me. I mean, it's one mind at a time that we're trying to crack open, right?
Well, if you're talking about celebrity within the science community, which is ridiculous, but there is celebrities in the science community.
Yeah, absolutely.
You got Bill Nye, you got Neil deGrasse, you got let's see, what's the guy's name?
Brian Cox.
Oh yeah,
No.
Brian Cox or Crying Box, and yeah, all those guys, they're never ever going to come on board with this because they're never going to consider it. They won't even consider theoretical models that are within their realm, like, you know, I don't know, something simple like inertia possibly being an electromagnetic force, which a lot of cutting-edge sciences are looking at that as a very real possibility. But then you've got old school guys that'll tell you, no, that's wrong, it's not possible. And if you press them and say, well, then, okay, what is inertia? They'll give you the word-by-word textbook definition that, you know, that mass is ultimately mass has inertia, and that's their argument, which doesn't make any sense.
Just because it does.
Yep. And they'll just
because we say so.
Yep, that's right. So,
So the whole, you know, what I try to do all the time is, you know, sort of pat people on the back and say, I'm proud of you that you got this far, okay? Don't be disillusioned. Don't be upset with yourself that you can't, you know, be a flat earth scientist or you aren't a flat earth physicist or something, because not everybody has that capability, nor do we want a bunch of flat earth physicists running around, because that's, you know, that's not really how life works. We have every kind of person who does every kind of thing and has every kind of ability, and it's going to be that way in the flat earth groups and movements and community. So don't beat yourself up because you can't regurgitate the Pythagorean theorem or whatever, because I can't. And I'm not interested in learning. I don't really even care. That's not what it's about for me. What it's about for me is overcoming the lies one by one, and understanding that all the lies are tied to the other lies, and that there's a reason for them. Because, you know, in natural human interaction, there's always got to be a reason for a lie when the truth is just so much easier to tell. Unless, of course, you're a psychopath. But why would you tell a lie? Why would you need to make something up unless it's either to protect yourself, to make yourself better than somebody else? You know, lying like I did this and I did that when you actually didn't really do that. To, you know, get yourself out of trouble. No, I didn't break the cookie jar. There's all kinds of reasons to lie, and when the truth should do, because, you know, I was told when I was a kid, if you lie and you get caught, you're going to get in twice as much trouble. If you tell the truth, you're going to get in trouble, but this too shall pass. So, you know, you had to make the decision when put to task at that moment in time. When did you break the cookie jar? You got to decide. Is this going to pass, or how important is this, and what are the ultimate ramifications of it? But then there's the lies that gain you something, that keep you ahead or above the other people, and that's where these lies come from. These lies are created to put these people in a position of authority, a position of arrogance, a position of power, and other people trust them to because they have street cred and they have respect and so on and so forth. They don't have it directly. You know, I don't respect, you know, President Obama because of his actions. I used to respect the office of the presidency, and the person who was in it, then, you know, I made the decision whether they were a good president or not. But you know what I'm saying is, why would they lie is always one of the big questions. And it's easy, because telling the truth put them in no better position than you or me, and they needed power.
Well, and to me, it seems like about, I don't know, 500 years ago, just an arbitrary number, but at some point in the past, science decided that we lived on a spinning globe, and they basically filtered out any observations or facts that didn't jive with their model, which is the opposite of science. Take a look, for example, Airy's failure, the Bedford level experiments. Anything that falls outside of the boundary of their model is cast aside. And then you have the peer-reviewed process, which is everything that they like and that the inner crowd of science is about, or what jives with their model. They all sort of do, forgive the language, is like a circle jerk is what peer-reviewed is, because what is the value of having your hypothesis strictly reviewed by people who agree with you? And that's one of the things that we've been trying to do on the Globebuster show, is to bring in, you know, contrary opinions, find out where their beliefs lie. And my general consensus is, from the guests that we've had on that show at least, is the people that cling to the globe model are being disingenuous, either with themselves or with the truth in general. I really do think that since we know this is a big secret, somebody must know in terms of the upper echelons of NASA, so there's somebody keeping this secret. They're probably got plenty of money, and what they do is, and this is a fact, they pay people to discredit the truth, and to not just so much discredit it, but to muddy the waters with alternate lines of thought, which really don't stack up with the truth. And so in doing this, they're helping the herd mentality of most people to keep shutting this out. And so I just think that's sort of the issues that we're running into with this thing really hitting critical mass, is there is an effort to keep it under wraps. But it seems like the more that they try to do that, the sharper we get. And so I think that's great. I mean, I don't think it's great, but I think that we need to take the hand that we're dealt and make the best of it. And often, you know, the enemy's weakness is often, you know, what seems like their strength. And to me, the shill's number one strength is circular argument and trying to assert things are factual when they're not. And so if you can disprove all of the tenets of their circular argument, then we can really get this, get this in front of more people, hopefully.
Yeah, you could even get on a money if you go on a holiday and take a flight. So, like if I was going from the UK, I usually go down to the Canaries because you get the guaranteed sunshine, and that's about 2,000 miles south. So, using the inches times the miles squared, that works out at 500-mile drop over the 2,000 miles. So the nose would have to be down all the way to just maintain altitude. But it doesn't. So if you can go on a plane and get these statistics, this information, just get it all printed out before you get on, and then just go and give it to everybody. They say, you know, did this meet your reality? Because we're supposed to have descended 500 miles on this 2,000-mile trip, and we only start coming down as we approach the airport. I mean, that's just so obvious.
Well, not only that, but take you a little, you know, I call them a little pocket level or speed level. It's about this long, and lay it on your tray table. Just
even,
let it lay there.
Let it to the pilot.
That,
you know,
that little bubble moves, you know, other than when you know you're going up or down, descending. But when they say, ladies and gentlemen, the plane level.
Pilot, you know, get into the what these women on the planes that serve the drinks call, the stewards or the men. There's men who do it as well, isn't there? The stewards, and say, I just want to ask the pilot a question. Are we not travelling 2,000 miles south here? Why is the plane level? Why isn't it going down to meet the curvature of the Earth? I want you to ask the pilot that. And give him, or can you give him this letter? Just give him a letter. You know, when the pilot has a cup of coffee for a break or something, and get them to actually answer your question.
Well, there was a guy who posted a photograph on my page of him sitting in his plane seat, holding a clear glass, plastic is what they always give you on the plane, a little plastic, and it had liquid in it, you know, like halfway up, right? And he's holding it up to the window, and showing that the liquid is up here and the eye level of the horizon is over here, and he's like, see, you know, the liquid's not at the same eye level as the you know, the camera is not what's determining what is, and he's going into this whole big long convoluted explanation of, and I'm like, what are we even looking at here? What is this supposed to be proving? You got the glass held up here, your camera is down here, it's obvious you're holding your camera below the liquid. What has A got to do with B? And then there was, of course, something about refraction. And I mean, I was like, people don't even understand what they're even thinking about.
That's what shills do too. What they'll do is they'll draw out diagrams and talk, you know, very assertive, like how stupid are the flat earthers, and they'll make a case that doesn't make any sense, but to an average person that doesn't really take the time to think this sort of thing through, they'll just say, oh yeah, this guy knows what he's talking about, flat earthers are stupid, and then now according to them, they've researched it, and they found it was stupid, and now they've dismissed it. And really,
I debunked it. Exactly.
Yeah, that's right.
I hear you.
Yep. It's all over the place.
That's you people are stupid. You're not just crazy and uneducated. You're actually retarded. That's what they say. So you know, I can't argue. I can't even argue with that. It's just so stupid. That's so stupid. Their argument's stupid, and yet, you know, then they'll turn around and I think they have these little powwows, these shill agent groups, because they come in all together. We had 3 of them hit us in our group this morning, and I got all kinds of notifications from people who were in this thread where these 3 different shill types were, you know, in there causing trouble. And I'm very nice. I say, you know, you realize that this is a flat earth closed group. You know why it's closed? And they said, yeah, so that, you know, no new information can get in. No, that's not why. It's because we've already done the research, and we already have concluded individually that we are flat earth believers, and so collectively we continue to discuss it. Okay, it has nothing to do with the fact that, you know, we're trying to create an echo chamber in here.
I get that on my YouTube videos a lot. Like, I'll put a video out, and there's no way I can keep up with all the comments and all the emails and stuff. I try, but there's just absolutely no way. You know, I'm one person. But what'll happen is somebody will ask a question, and within 5 minutes, they'll get 4 different answers from 4 different obvious trolls, and basically saying, this is how it is, this guy's stupid, and then the person will be like, oh, thanks, you know, I appreciate the information, because they assume that because somebody asserts something to them, they must be correct. But in fact, you know, that's just it's an intellectual cop-out. You know, I suggest everybody do their own research, and if you have legitimate questions, you know, that's one thing, but you can't just take the first answer from a random person. And furthermore, you know, I submit that anybody who claims to have all the answers about this either way is lying, because, you know, too much of the globe earth proof has been disproven, and a lot of the flat earth stuff is indeed conjecture. But, you know, the basics of it we can prove conclusively. The Earth is flat and stationary. So, again, you know, we like to think there must be some logical explanation for this, that, or the other. But, in fact, you know, with the tools that we have right now, especially as biased observers, you know, there may not be a logical explanation for every minute detail at this point. We may find things out later, But the only way that we're going to really get this thing figured out is if we have more and more people focusing on it and really doing the observations, doing the science, and not just running with the first theory that we think makes sense to us or that we like, or the theory that is repeated ad nauseum over and over and over and over, and uses predictive programming like the Truman Show to back up their points is just ridiculous to me, because any of the predictive programming is going to be something that we want to try to avoid and eliminate out of the back of our minds, not use as proof for these observations, if I'm making sense.
Well, yeah, and I actually, somebody said to me, asked me a question in the group and said, how does the eclipse work? It's one of my least favorites, but I give it a shot, and I say, well, here's how I know it doesn't work. Okay, I know that it is not the Earth's shadow creating the shadow on the moon, it coming between the sun and the moon. I know that because I've seen an eclipse in where the moon and the sun are above the horizon at the same time. So it can't be the Earth making the shadow. And then they're like, well, then how does the moon work? Okay, well, the moon, not really positive, not really sure, but I am fairly confident that I believe that the moon makes its own light, and it is not just reflecting sunlight. That doesn't mean it isn't also possibly reflecting sunlight, but I feel it makes its own light. Well, then how does it eclipse? Well, again, this is conjecture. It's a possibility that maybe the moon has its own inner mechanism that shadows it from inside or from behind.
And the best theory I've heard so far for lunar eclipses, because solar eclipses, to me, that there's good evidence that it's the moon, going across the sun. There's other evidence to suggest that might not be the case, but I think that that's fairly reasonable for solar eclipses. For lunar eclipses, the best theory I've heard so far is actually from Bob Nodell on the Jeranism show. He's into electric engineering and that sort of thing, but he seems to think that it could be caused by something similar to the Faraday effect, which would be caused by the magnetic fields of the Earth itself, and even the red tinge of the light on the moon actually does jive with the Faraday effect, and it's sort of bending light waves and distorting light waves. It's a little more complicated than that, but the way Bob described it made sense. Am I going to swear that that is what it is? No. There's other theories that there's a non-physical, or I guess, yeah, maybe a non-physical translucent body that from time to time passes in front of the moon, and that could make some sense too, but we obviously know that there's absolutely no way that the Earth could be in between the sun and the moon, because again, the Earth is a stationary plane, obviously, so there has to be some explanation for it, but I don't think lunar eclipses prove the globe Earth whatsoever. In fact, I would say that it's pretty, to me, it struck me as odd that during from 1900 to 2000, there were exactly 228 solar eclipses, and that's total, annular, and hybrids all included. And there were 230 lunar eclipses during the same 100-year period. So lunar and solar eclipses are basically, equivalent. They're equally as rare or equally as likely, depending on how you look at it. But with that in mind, if you think about this, you'd really expect to see way more lunar eclipses if the Earth was indeed, traversing that path of the sun, just simply because of the nature of our system. The Earth should cast its shadow on the sun, at least a couple, once a month. But we only see on the moon, right? Sorry, I get a little discombobulated, but that's okay. That's exactly right. That in order for a solar eclipse to work, you're talking about the tiny little speck of a moon perfectly traversing the sun that's 400 times further away from it. It would just seem far more unlikely to see a solar eclipse in a random scenario than it would be to see a lunar eclipse. And the fact that they're roughly equivalent shows to me that there's something majorly wrong with the conventional model. And, again, I urge everyone, take a look at my Earth Not a Globe video. It's pretty recent, but what I did was just hammer out 3 basic proofs, and then just talked about gravity and the Coriolis effect as disproofs, and just basically, logically speaking, you know, this thing is proven as not a spinning globe, so there has to be something else that we're not thinking of, and the electromagnetic field of the Earth and the Faraday effect explains, or could explain, lunar eclipses perfectly adequately to me, at least until we find something better.
Well, the fact that when you take a photo, or you see a photograph, or you take a photograph of the moon with a zoom lens during the day when it's up, and it's blue.
Yeah.
The shadows on the moon should be gray or black, like it is when we see them at night, but they're not. They're blue, and they look sort of see-through. And the part that is shadowed, supposedly by the direction that the sun is coming at it, is blue. It's not a black shadow like you see at the moon at night when it is in one of its phases. And so, you know, there's no way to define that.
Think about this, though. Okay, that we all know that the moonlight is far less bright than the sunlight, and even seems to be less bright than the starlight. Okay, and there are days where you can see a half moon in the sky during the daytime and see the sun over here. But if you really think about it, if we can see the lit side of the moon during the day, then why can't we see the stars? That doesn't make any sense, because that moonlight is it's not as bright. It doesn't seem to be as you know, bright as the starlight, but we can see the moon during the day. Now, on the other hand, though, the fact that you can't see the dark side of the moon and it appears like it's just blue sky on the dark side of the moon during the day, to me, that's explained pretty well. It's just the atmosphere is reflecting back at you on the dark side, because there's nothing to reflect from the moon. So you're just seeing atmosphere that's in between your eye and the moon reflecting back at you. And it's, you know, you can see examples of this even looking off into the horizon. If you've got a good enough lens and you got the right angle, ships that are beyond the horizon line will appear to be flying in the sky, because all you're seeing is sky underneath it, because the atmosphere is reflecting back at you. So that's what it seems like to me when you can see the moon. You know, the dark side of the moon looks like sky. It's just the sky reflecting back at you. But at the same time, how can we see the moon during the daytime, but we can't see the stars? So, you know, there is a lot of mystery to this thing.
Well, that people say, you know, they see Venus, or they see one of the other
during twilight, maybe
so-called stars or planets.
Yeah.
So he's talking to his cat, I hope.
I'm just talking to my dog. My dog's saying,
okay.
Over everything.
So I don't. My ego has had to go in check, so to speak, when I have to determine that there's some of these things that I don't know, may never understand. And I don't have an answer, and I don't know how to get the answer, because you can't go to the conventional science avenues to get the answer to questions that are the antithesis to. You're being very disruptive, Lawrence.
That's my dog. I was just showing him who it was.
You know, it's funny, too, because one of the things I actually just mentioned in that same video was, if you Google search, what is the equation to figure the expected curvature of the Earth, I believe it was the first or second, actually the first and second result. The one that I used in the video was from mathcentral.ca, I believe. And the first answer to that question was a bunch of gobbledygook jargon, and ultimately it was 8 inches per mile. And so when I put that in the video, I noticed one of the comments was, oh, well, you didn't read down on further, and somebody corrected him. But the point is, though, the top search results tell you that the curvature calculation is 8 inches per mile. So yeah, you're right. I mean, you can't go through these necessary channels to get all the answers, because there seems to be a concerted effort to sort of to dissuade people from even looking at this. So.
And that was stating that very nicely. Seems to be a concerted effort. Is about as diplomatic as you can be, because in my opinion, if you have to go to page 6 to get to the actual curvature calculator that's based on spherical trigonometry, that's based on an Earth with a 25,000 just shy mile circumference, then if you have to go to page 6 to get that, then it's their math. It's not our math. It's based on their theory that the Earth is this size. Okay.
And that's right. And we don't.
Why would I have to go to page 6 to find that? You should be like all big and braggy and proud of yourselves that you have this formula to prove that the Earth is this size and it's round. But no, we're hiding that way down because that's flat earther evolved information, not yours. So why would you need to lie? Why would you even need to lie about something so simple as the mathematics to discover curvature? Because you have some bulge theory about the bulging water. We know it doesn't bulge. Give us a break. There's no bulging water. You can go out in the ocean and you can sit right there in the middle where it's water around you 360 degrees. There's no freaking bulge. Now, we're not talking about swells, and we're not talking about waves, and we're not talking about wind blowing, and tossing the boat around. We're talking about on smooth water, which happens, and you look around, there's no bulge. There's no water bulge.
That's right. And, another thing to point out, and Tiger Dan went up to, I can't remember where he went, but he was basically at the shore in England. He's in England, 100 foot up on a cliff, basically, and he had a spirit level set up and then camera set up behind it. And you can see perfectly that the horizon line is perfectly level across that entire distance. One thing that he noticed is if you take the camera and look way, sort of at an angle across the spirit level to the horizon, it starts to dip downward a little bit, but that's perspective. If you were to take that spirit level in the camera and just move it along this way, you could see the entire horizon line is perfectly flat. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is a few feet here in front of you, if you transfer that out to the horizon line at 30 miles away, you're compressing 20 or 30 miles into an area, a few feet wide. And so what you should see is you should very clearly see that 8 inches per mile squared across, 50 miles or 100 miles of horizon if you're at the beach from eye to eye, and you don't see it. That curvature isn't there.
So tell the Globers why we have to square the miles and why it's not just 8 inches a mile.
Yeah, because 8 inches a mile would describe a gentle slope. Anybody that knows any sort of geometry will know that if you're describing a curve, especially a curve that's going to be a perfect sphere at the end, you're going to have to square that distance.
And why do you have to square? For the real dunces who think that if they just repeat back what the Gomers tell them that's true, why do you have to square them?
Well, if you're describing a parabolic curve in geometric terms, 8 inches per mile is just going to drop 8 inches every mile. 8 inches every mile. Okay, but if you're on a curve, it's an exponential effect. So the first mile you're dropping 8 inches, but the second mile you're dropping 32 inches. The third mile you're dropping 39 times 8 is 72 inches. And it's an exponential effect to the point to where once you get out 20 miles, 30 miles, 50 miles, 60 miles, you're talking about like a quarter mile or a third mile of curvature that doesn't exist. It isn't there.
Because when you're trying to figure spherical trigonometry on a sphere and you're actually trying to measure curvature and you're looking out at the water, okay, the Earth is curving forward away from you, it's curving to your left away from you, and it's curving to your right away from, and it's curving behind you, curving away. It's curving away in all directions.
It should be.
It should be.
Yeah. But it's not. That's the point.
But it would be, according to mathematics, that because they're the ones saying it's a ball. We're not, they are. So it's kind of like, prove it, okay? In order to prove it, you have to come up with a mathematical equation that proves this curvature, this drop that you're so willing to explain to me that freaking boat is going over when I'm looking at it over the water, okay? So if that's the case, I'm not saying that we're supposed to see a frowny face while we're looking out at X amount of miles away, but that's what would be happening if I were a giant on a smaller ball. It would be I'm standing on the top of a basketball. It would be curving behind me, in front of me, and beside me, both ways. That's spherical trigonometry. You cannot measure it with 8 inches drop per mile because that's just a forward slope. The Earth is not a pyramid. The Earth is a sphere, according to them. So you have to have the math. Huh?
How do you know on a sphere where you are, if you were on a sphere, where you are on the sphere, and how do you know whether it's curving up or curving down? Because you don't know, you haven't got a reference point, have you? If you've got
unless where you are is where they tell you are on that globe with that thing down through the middle to spinning.
What was going down becomes going up. So how would you know whether if you were trying to measure where you were going, whether you were looking for a downward curve or an upward curve? You wouldn't know.
Well, I actually used to kind of be a real stickler about when someone would say, I live in Florida and someone would call me from Illinois and we're talking on the phone and they'll say, well, how are things going up there? And I'm going, no, I'm down, remember? I mean, it used to really bother me. No, I'm down, you're up. And because we're on a ball and you're farther north than I am.
Where's the right way up for the ball? You don't, do you? Which is the right way up if everything was as they say, that there is no up or down, is there? So how do you know which bit you are?
No, because everybody's sticking out at whatever perpendicular to the ball, right? Yeah, the guys down in Australia are flying planes upside down. Their heads are sticking down from the land.
Yeah, they're on the top.
Well, what if they are? Then that means I'm sticking down. How would I know? Well, the blood would rush to my head. No, it wouldn't, because the atmosphere is going with us. They think they have an argument for everything, but it's not an argument. It's just an explanation that you came as some ad hoc, reverse engineered bullshit explanation that you have for why your model works. But it just doesn't work that way.
If you flew from Florida, say, to New York, you'd be following the curve one way. So let's say you were going uphill one way to get around the curve.
Yeah.
And then when you come back,
I'm going
the plane should be going downhill all the way back. So it should be uphill one way and downhill the other. But it isn't.
No, I mean, really, though, if you think about it with the laws of gravity, no matter which way you go, it should always be downhill. Really. It should, because you're always at the top of the sphere, supposedly. There is no top or bottom of it. So no matter which way you go, should always be downhill. And that doesn't make any sense for one. But, okay, so if you concede to that, then indeed airplanes flying level would be going at a tangent off to the surface, and just by flying level, they'd gain in altitude. Here's the ground. It should curve away from them just by going straight and level. Excuse me, I got a frog in my throat.
You should be flying off into space in a very short period of time.
That's right.
Well, and it's the same theory about why don't the buildings tilt away from you when you can see them 50 miles away. It's the same thing. If I'm standing up here and this building's 50 miles away, it should be like angling that way just a little bit, but it's not, because every building is still perpendicular to one another. They build buildings straight, straight up from the surface. They don't build buildings out in an angle. I've seen a couple, and they're kind of cool. They're kind of cantilevered, and, that's kind of cool. But
I'm glad you brought that up, because something that a lot of people will argue is that you wouldn't be able to see such an angle away at 50 miles. But the center of curvature is the center of the Earth. So supposedly, in their model. Yeah. And so, a building that's 50 miles away should not only be, below your horizon line, Okay. Also, you have to figure in perspective, so it's even worse than that. But furthermore, the thing should be slightly angled away from you, and yet we can see these buildings from 50 miles away, like the one Joshua Nowicki took of the Chicago skyline from near Mir State Park, over 50 miles, and the buildings are perfectly visible above the horizon. It's not a mirage, and they're perpendicular to the horizon, even at that distance, which is clear evidence. You shouldn't even be able to see the tip tops of those buildings because of the so-called curve of the Earth that doesn't exist in reality.
Exactly.
So, there you go.
And you know what's interesting is, yes, there's a lot of flat places on Earth, flatter terrain than other places. You know, I live in Florida, it's like the flattest state, okay? When you get up to North Florida, then you might get what's kind of called a hill or a little bit of an elevation, but it's flat, okay? And the same thing with Utah or Kansas, okay? They're flat. That's just in the United States. There's places in other countries, you know, that are also flat for miles. I mean, flat for miles. They don't curve away, okay? And so if you don't live in one of those places, you don't live near the ocean, and you only live, you know, in a hilly terrain type area where you really can't see very far to a horizon, because the ground naturally comes up to meet your eyes in your own ability to see. That's part of the way we see. The ground comes up, the sky comes down, and they meet. That's the point of convergence. And I have people who argue, you know, that, oh, that's some Robotham gobbledygook. I've actually had people use that word on me, gobbledygook. But if you put your chin right down on the table, if you can find the long table, and put your chin right at the edge of the table and look, the end of the table will be at eye level. I mean, it's true. Anybody go do it. It happens every single time. You know that the table isn't tilting up, but that's what it looks like if it's long. The end of the table is the horizon line, and it is at eye level. And it'll always be at eye level because it's your eyes that are making the horizon line. It isn't some curvature. That's another part of the confusion that I get into arguments with other flat earthers. No wonder we don't understand even how the horizon works and how perspective works and how the vanishing point works unless somebody can find you the perfect photograph, like Jamie Warner made the other day of a hallway. You know, the sides come in, the floor and the ceiling come down to meet one another at the end of the hallway, and there is a vanishing point. It's a very long hallway. It's the same thing. He showed a picture of the windshield of a car looking out at a snowstorm. Now, you know good and well that all that snow is flying at you at the same direction. But when you look at the windshield at the snowstorm coming at you, the snow is coming like this. Some of the snow is coming right at your eyes, and some of the snow is coming over here to the outside of the windshield. And you know it's not working that way. I mean, we're not talking about blowing snow. We're talking about driving through straight down coming at you snow. So it's how your eyes work. And nobody can disqualify that at all, because nobody can prove, we can't see far enough to prove otherwise, right?
That's totally right. And you know, one of the reasons why it is hard to sort of prove this thing to people is because we can only observe so much of the Earth at a time. And so even if it was a sphere with the given circumference, you know, the horizon works. Where it falls apart is when we have the ability to gain altitude in a hot air balloon or a plane or a weather balloon. And again, you know, that horizon line is, if you're up in the air looking down, your field of vision is essentially like a giant cone that ends at the horizon. Now, when you get higher and higher up, your field of view increases, but it stays level on the same plane, which is clearly proof of the flat Earth, especially when you get up to 30 miles and 40 miles. but yeah, it is difficult because some of these observations work on a spinning sphere Earth, but you have to take a lot of assumptions with it, and it doesn't work empirically. The spinning globe, anyway.
Okay, so anybody have it? We're at a little over 2 hours, and that's usually about the limit most people will spend on a video. So anybody have any special thing they want to talk about, that they're working on, anything they'd like people to research or look up during this week so that when we talk about it next week, they have a better understanding, anything like that?
I just want to ask the Morgal about what he thinks is going to happen when Mark Sargent goes on the Art Bell show on next month. Do you think he's going to get the same treatment you did, or do you think it'll be different?
Well, I started listening to the one. It's funny. It just popped up on YouTube, and so I heard the first 5 minutes of the one with Mark Sargent on the George Norrie show, and it seemed like he got a pretty good, introduction. So I don't see why they would do any different on the Art Bell show. I think it's the same producers. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know, but I hope he does well. But I think Mark Sargent does some good work. But I just disagree with him, creating his whole personification of this thing as an enclosed system like the Truman Show. I just disagree with that at the most fundamental levels. And if the mainstream media, like Art Bell and George Norrie, they're about as mainstream as you're going to get in the Flat Earth movement, if they're pushing an enclosed system model, then, I would just be careful about that, because as far as I've seen, there isn't enough evidence to say conclusively that it's an enclosed system. I've seen other evidence that leans toward it being not an enclosed system whatsoever. And for us to, couple ourselves with ideas such as a physical dome in the sky, it's going to cause problems down the road. And so we really need to be careful about what we subscribe to, especially what's pushed by the mainstream media.
I'd like to make a comment about that too, Lawrence. I challenge you, Mark Sargent, to try the best you can to state your case, to explain Flat Earth, to cover all the bases as best you can because you understand it, and to do it without promoting the dome. If you can do that, then you're going to do the Flat Earth a really big favor. If you can't do that, I'd like to know why. Because that theory is not inextricably tied to the Flat Earth theory. And I know you watch a lot of my shows, and I know if you're not watching, someone will tell you I called you out, because they do, and I know they do. So if you can do this debate without going there, it's not necessary.
Telling us about the fucking dome. Shut up about the bloody dome. The Truman Show. The Truman Show. How many times have you mentioned the Truman Show? We're sick of hearing about it. And if you're watching Mark Sargent, if you're watching this, Admiral Byrd spent 30 years on and off going back to Antarctica. It wouldn't take that long to find a bloody dome. If I went over there with a dozen men and a couple of airplanes, I'd find it in 2 days. So what was he doing for 30 years? He wasn't prattling about looking for a dome. And then if he was going to bloody blow a hole in the dome, why would he send bloody nuclear weapons up? He could just put some dynamite straight in the bloody side of it, blow a hole, and they can go and have a look for the other side. Your theory's a load of toss, mate.
Oh my God! I have to make a clip out of this little part right here, all by itself, because the whole show just got dynamic because of you, Lawrence. You rocked that.
I gotta tell you, man. I really agree.